In this video, I'm going to discuss that I know nothing. Because I don't know. I don't know everything. But I do know nothing. I know the nature of nothing. I know the limitations of my knowledge. And I know what I do not know. But I also don't know what I don't know. And I can't always know what I don't know. But I can know unknowns, and I can come to know unknowns. And I can know unknowns through interest and inquiry and engaging in physicality. Not just engaging with my mind, though that's important too, because often how we come to know is through engaging with our mind and preliminarily engaging with our mind. Not necessarily just through our mind, but with our mind, as our mind, and also at a distance from our mind, which is interesting to think about because there's a sort of irony to that, right? We're minds that come to understand the nature of the mind and the presence of mind within mind. And we mind this. We mind this often through our conscious volitions and understanding of what's not known and unknown and the limitations of knowledge and why that matters. Why does not knowing matter? Well, there's inherent meaning and meaningfulness to that. And in particularly, it's this meaningfulness that keeps us learning and keeps us going. Not just learning, but going, and that psychologically sustains ourselves. Why? Well, knowledge is necessary. It necessitates our existence. It's also how we tend to acquire what we need to survive. And without knowledge or an understanding of truth, none of this would exist. Because we would cease to exist. And our minds wouldn't be able to function. Especially, they wouldn't be able to function without what's true or knowledge and an understanding of physicality. So when we come to understand nothing, we start to, ironically, come to understand something through knowing something and knowing that we don't know something, or that we can also recognize the character of not knowing and the nature of nothing in that, because it's a component of nothingness, right? Not knowing has a lack of, and if nothing is, say, the same as zero, then what's to separate that from not knowing? There's an absence of something, there's no knowledge there. But that's not quite true in the same manner in which we semanticize nothing. When we don't know something, we know that we don't know if we can recognize that we don't know. And when we don't do that, then we actually don't know nothing. So it's important to recognize that we don't know when we don't know, what we don't know, why we don't know, and for what reasons, and if we can know or if we should know, and why we should know, or why is it that we need to know, and maybe we don't need to know. Maybe we're just interested in knowing or curious, and those are okay too within good conscience, though we have to also respect, not so much respect, but we have to recognize that there are other minds in our surrounds, and that it's important to appreciate individual autonomy as well as individual differences that pertain to knowledge and privacy, and these intrinsic aspects of being an individual as well as individuals with a recognized self that are in a surrounds of civilization that protects psychological sustainability through protecting privacy and autonomy and not infringing upon it, because that would demonstrate a lack of understanding of psychological sustainability, incompetence, as well as deteriorate civilization and individual psychological sustainability and health through invading privacy and negatively impacting autonomy that's individually different and might also stifle what an individual needs and the necessary knowledge as well as meaningful processes and engaging in physicality that matters to an individual, not just matters, but is necessary for their existence, and also their intellect and their working psychological mind that would become otherwise dysfunctional if an individual stifles their autonomy or privacy in terms of knowledge. So sometimes when we inquire in what we don't know, or we try to gain access into somebody else's mind without recognizing these bounds in our surrounds in relation to a surrounds where other minds observe and can know and can learn due to the nature of the free access of information, that once we express it or self-express it in a physicality of our environment, and not just internally in our heads, but must be a physicality in the environment, because going inside the heads, that would be a major invasion of autonomy and privacy, but that is the sanctuary in which we tend to find privacy and autonomy and can do most of our meaningful work, and can also be more of our psychologically optimal selves without the fear or the constraints that are placed by the observation of other minds, or the misunderstanding and miscommunication of knowledge that is individually different and distinctive to individuals, and might only pertain to individuals and be otherwise misconstrued by other minds. And this would place an individual's autonomy in a state of disorder or dysfunction by corrupting the information or the knowledge internal to them in relation to a physicality with other minds in a surrounds that impact an individual's well-being for ill, and through these ill qualia, these negative experiences, increased frequency of negative emotion, but not just negative emotion, harm onto the body, physical harm, psychological harm, and even social or cultural harm that's inflicted not just to the self, but other individuals in the surrounds. It can have a detrimental impact on pretty much every aspect of well-being, and the necessitating aspects of living a meaningful life, such as somebody's capacity to work, or their economic situation, their shelter, their access to food sources, access to information or knowledge, access to other individuals, and being able to communicate or relate to them in meaningful or effective ways that are necessary for their survival, their physical health, their psychological health, and their well-being in general, but also for a sense of meaningfulness and a sense of purposefulness that can easily be stifled through the priviness and prying of unwanted onlookers who tend to distort individually different information because they lack knowledge, and oftentimes through ignorance, not knowing why that person thinks that, or if that's even true, and starts to instantiate distinctive meanings of their own that aren't recognized as their own, and are different subjective truths that pertain not so much to the objective domain of truth, but the subjective domain of truth, and have these proportioned elements of objective truths that tend to, unfortunately, sustain these negative dynamics through this invasion of privacy or stifling of an individual autonomy. And we know that oftentimes in places that have high levels of surveillance, there's a stifling of creativity and innovation, and a decrease in the lifespan, reductions in longevity, proclivity for people to become more ill and sick due to infringements of autonomy and breaches of privacy that have a negative psychological impact and physiological impact on individuals' minds, their subjective experience, their consciousness, but also their body and their behavior and their capacity to work or think or do anything. It can stifle various aspects of our being. And coming to a knowledge of the self that is aware and also self-compassionate in regards to understanding the domain applicability of knowns, unknowns, and not yet knowns, as well as don't need to knows and need to knows, are important and essentializing for greatening self-intelligence. Greatening self-intelligence through being able to correctly categorize and to modulate various systems of knowledge and ways of applying knowledge and innovating regarding knowledge, instantiating knowledge, as well as coming to understanding a deeper understanding of what's true and objectively true through the ways of knowing, an understanding of the nature of knowledge, and the inquiry into knowledge in regards to discerning what is perceived, imagined, speculated, or true, and also speculated truths of existence that pertain to what's now immediately true or known, and regard what will be true if what's now true is true now, and therefore will occur in the future if this is true now. So a speculative truth makes predictions that will occur in the moment that the priors are being conceived of within a temporal frame and within a dynamic to that temporal frame that shapes the nature of speculative truths through a position in relation to space-time and our own psychological minds that interface with that space-time and which perceive what will be true in the constraints of what is currently true and must be true if this is currently true now. So, for example, I may have never went to McDonald's, right? And I know that if I'm in a car and I go to McDonald's and I have all my stuff and there's nobody around me and the McDonald's door is open and there's people there, that if I intend and start to move and open that door and actually go into that McDonald's, I will have actually been to McDonald's. And I know that because I haven't been to McDonald's, I am not necessarily certain that I am going to ever be at McDonald's. But I can come to certainty by positioning myself in a place in which I am in close proximity to guaranteeing that truth and therefore knowing that truth. So just because I don't yet know something doesn't mean I can't know it in advance or speculate in regards to that and that be true. That doesn't necessarily mean that the moments that I go to McDonald's, like before I actually get into that door and go through that door, something could happen, right? Maybe the world ends, or aliens come and they actually have these tractor beams, and right as I get to that door, I end up getting pulled to the sky, something I couldn't predict or foresee. And therefore, this speculative truth would cease to be a speculative truth. It would be incorrect. It would not work. But prior to that, I have less reason to believe that I will not go to McDonald's than when I actually perceive that I will go to McDonald's through my speculations. So I hope that makes sense, and that's all I'm going to say for this video. I hope you enjoy it. Bye.